He treated a crash survivor. He saved a galactic sovereign. At the time, honestly, Kaelen just thought he was saving his laminate flooring from being permanently stained by silver fluid. The storm outside Aqueous 9 was doing its usual impression of a drowning ocean, battering the prefab walls of the clinic with relentless, hammering rain. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the heater and the jagged breathing of the woman lying on the biobed. Well, woman was a loose term. Vela looked mostly humanoid, sure, but the way her skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen under the harsh medical lights suggested her family tree had roots in a nebula somewhere deep in the void. Kaelen sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He was just a doctor. Anna, a doctor who had specifically requested this posting because nothing ever happened here. And now he had a 6-foot-tall warrior bleeding out on his exam table. Her blood was silver, her armor was sentient, and her enemies were already here. He reached for a pressurized gauze pad. "Don't touch me," Vila hissed. Her voice was like grinding stones, though it wavered with exhaustion. Her eyes, wide and pupilless, like pools of liquid mercury, darted around the room. I am dangerous." "Yeah, and you're also dripping on my equipment," Kaelen muttered, ignoring the threat with that terrifyingly casual Terran empathy that baffled half the galaxy. "Look, I don't care if you're an escaped convict or the queen of the sector. Right now, you're a patient with a laceration that needs closing. So honestly, just hold still." He moved in. Nana Vila braced herself. She expected pain. She expected the cold, sterile cruelty of an interrogation. In her culture, weakness was a death sentence. To be wounded was to be discarded. Instead, she felt heat. It was shocking. The human's hand brushed against her shoulder to steady her, and the contact sent a riotous jolt through her nervous system. Humans. They were so impossibly warm. Her species, endothermic but reliant on ambient energy, treated internal heat as a precious, hoarded resource. To radiate it so freely, it was reckless. It was overwhelming. Her scales, usually a disciplined matte gray, rippled into a soft, involuntary lavender. Kaelen paused, looking at the color shift. "Does that hurt? Or is that just a mood ring thing?" "I do not know what a mood ring is," Vela managed, her dual hearts hammering out of sync, a biological panic response to intimacy. Why is your skin burning?" "I run at 98.6, Kaelen said, applying the biogel. He didn't flinch at her alien nature. He didn't recoil. He just worked, his brow furrowed in concentration. To Vela, this was the greatest culture shock of all. He wasn't conquering her. He wasn't demanding her surrender. He was just fixing her. The concept that compassion transcends species barriers and bureaucratic protocols was alien to the High Command. Yet here was this soft, squishy human stitching her back together as if it were the most logical thing in the universe. There was a sudden, sharp rap at the clinic door. Vela's muscles coiled. She tried to sit up, her armor's latent combat subroutines humming to life, but Kaelen pushed her back down. Not rough, just firm. "Stay," he whispered. He walked to the door, wiping the silver blood from his hands onto a rag. When he opened it, the wind howled, carrying the voice of Captain Merrick. "We detected an impact trajectory, Doctor," Merrick barked, peering past Kaelen's shoulder. "Unauthorized entry. Protocol dictates immediate surrender of any biological entities." Kaelen blocked the view with his body. He didn't look like a warrior. He looked like a man who hadn't had his coffee. But there was a steel in his spine that Vela watched from the shadows. "Just a meteorite, Captain," Kaelen lied. Smoothly, effortlessly. Truth is, it clipped the solar array. "I'm dealing with a power fluctuation, not an invasion. Unless you want to come in and help me recalibrate the localized grid in the dark?" Merrick hesitated, and the rain lashed at his uniform. No one wanted to do paperwork in the dark. "Fine," the captain grunted. "Report any debris." When the door clicked shut, Kaelen let out a breath he'd been holding. He turned back to Vela, offering a small, tired smile. Coast is clear. Vela stared at him. He had lied to his own hierarchy. He had defied the law to protect a stranger who could snap his neck. It didn't make sense. True authority is defined by restraint and the protection of the vulnerable, her teachers had said, but she had never seen it practiced until now. Why? She asked, her voice smaller now. Kaelen shrugged, walking over to a small kitchenette in the corner. He poured hot water into a chipped mug. I don't know, instinct maybe? Plus, Merrick is a pain in the neck. He walked back and held out the mug. It smelled of herbs and steam. Here, Shupper, he said. It's tea. It'll help with the shock. Vela took the mug. The ceramic was hot, infused with the heat of the liquid and the lingering warmth of his fingers. She held it with both hands, bringing it close to her chest. The warmth seeped into her silver blood, quieting the frantic beating of her heart. She looked at him, really looked at him, over the rim of the mug. He was fragile. He was oblivious. He was dangerous. The only thing more dangerous than her enemies was falling in love with her. Or perhaps, she realized as the steam warmed her face, it was the terrifying possibility of falling for him. The tea was still warm when the perimeter alarm chirped, a tiny pathetic sound against the roar of the gale. Kaelen frowned at his tablet, the blue light reflecting in his tired eyes. I mean, it is probably just a stray branch, he said, when though his hand drifted toward the emergency lockdown. Truth is, this place is held together by spit and prayers. Vela didn't think it was a branch. Her armor, though scarred and dented from the crash, began to pulse with a low thrumming violet. The assassins didn't use doors. They preferred the high-velocity breach through the ventilation shafts. Two shapes, lithe and draped in shadow cloaks, dropped into the center of the room with a metallic clang. Kaelen didn't scream. He didn't run. He just stepped in front of the biobed, holding a heavy stainless steel tray like a shield. It was ridiculous. It was suicide. Back off, Kaelen said, his voice a bit higher than usual, but remarkably steady. She is my patient. I am still monitoring her vitals and she is in no condition to be moved. The lead assassin paused, tilted its head. One had spoken a tongue of sharp clicks, but the intent was clear. The sovereign was to be harvested, and the human was an irrelevant obstacle. Honestly, I do not think you heard me, Kaelen added, taking a small, defiant step forward. You are tracking mud on my clean floor, and she is resting. Vila watched him from the bed. To the assassins, he was a nuisance to be pruned. To her, he was an anomaly that broke every rule of survival she had ever been taught. She felt the resonance in her chest, the way her dual hearts were beginning to beat in the same frantic, stubborn rhythm as his. Trust is a biological imperative that can override political logic. She didn't need a treaty or a blood oath anymore. She just needed him to keep breathing. She stood up, the lavender of her scales deepening into a fierce, incandescent gold. The human said, "Leave," she commanded. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was a tectonic shift. When the assassins lunged, Vela didn't move to strike them. Instead, she reached out with her mind, tapping into the encrypted frequency of the dreadnought hanging silent in the upper atmosphere. In the distance beyond the storm clouds, there was the low stomach churning rumble of orbital strikes. Not on the clinic, but on the extraction ships waiting in the woods. The assassins froze as their comms went dead. You have 10 seconds to get out of my clinic, Kaelen said, waving the tray. Or I am charging you for the door repairs. They fled. Perhaps it was the threat of the invisible armada, or perhaps it was the sheer baffling confidence of a man armed with nothing but medical supplies and a fierce sense of protectiveness. Nah, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of a storm, but the silence of an ending. You're leaving, Kaelen said, setting the tray down. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a man who knew how stories like this usually ended, with the hero going home and the doctor staying behind. My empire is fractured, Vela said, her skin slowly fading back to gray, though her hand lingered on his sleeve. I must reclaim the throne, but The bond is formed. She reached out, her fingers, long and cool, touching his cheek. The human touch was a strange thing. To Kaelen, it was just a gesture of comfort. To Vela, it was a signature written on her soul. She realized then that the human bond was the strongest force in the galaxy, more durable than any alloy. "I will be back for the checkup," she whispered, a rare, awkward attempt at a human joke. "I mean, you still haven't finished your tea," Kaelen said, his eyes a little misty. "And I am pretty sure you are still on a restricted diet for at least another week." Vela leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. It was a gesture of her people, a sharing of heat and thought. But here it felt like something more. The magic of mundanity was that a cup of tea could feel like a kingdom, and a small, isolated clinic could feel more like home than a throne room ever could. She stepped back, her armor shimmering as she prepared for the transport beam. "Next time," she said, "bring better tea." "I will see what I can do," Kaelen replied, watching the silver light take her. He stood in the middle of his empty clinic for a long time after she was gone. The storm was finally breaking, leaving the air smelling of ozone and wet earth. Truth is, the universe was a big, cold place, but as Kaelen picked up the two empty mugs, he couldn't help but feel that it was just a little bit warmer than it had been an hour ago.